Hi, I'm Michael Woods, Chief Scientist at the Asian Turfgrass Center, Director of the Pace Turf Information Service, and also an Adjunct Professor at the University of Tennessee. I'm at Ishigaki Island and I'm going to make a botanical walk along the beach. And I'm going to check to see what type of grasses I can find, specifically looking for seashore paspalum, which we might expect to find near the ocean, and looking for zoysia. And I'm going to see what type of habitat, what type of growing environment I can find these grasses growing in, if I can find them. I made a video like this 11 years ago, and in that video the audio is not so good because there's a bit of a breeze blowing at this island location, and I find that video very difficult to watch. Although the content in it is okay, and we find those grasses, and I'm going to try to see if I can find them again on the walk today, I find the video difficult to watch because of the wind noise in that particular video. So I am going to walk along a stretch of beach out to a point beyond an old telegraph station, and that I think is going to be about 4 or 5 kilometers. And on some of these areas it's just going to be sand and there won't be so much grass. But in a few areas, especially in some tidal swamps, I'll look for seashore paspalum. And on some other areas where I found zoysia on that walk 11 years ago, I'm going to be looking for it again today. In the distance over there you can see Takitomi Island. In fact, I was over there last week. And I saw zoysia, I saw seashore paspalum, and I also saw Sporobolus virginicus, which is a common grass near the ocean. That one is called seashore dropseed, sometimes also called saltwater cooch. Well, here's a little bit of grass, and this will be seashore dropseed, Sporobolus virginicus. And this grass is pretty common along the beach. It's very salt tolerant, has nice long rhizomes, and it's not a turf grass, but it's one that we do find, and it'll be found sometimes in the sand dune areas. Sand moves, and because sand is not stable, and because it moves with the wind or moves with the waves, areas of the beach, a lot of them won't have any plants growing, and that includes grasses. So along this section, I haven't seen any grasses, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find any seashore paspalum. Seashore paspalum will usually be found in a tidal swamp type of area, areas where it is sometimes completely saturated with water, and other times where it is not completely covered with water. So right now I haven't found any of those tidal swamp areas, and I did find some paspalum when I did this walk 11 years ago, but I don't remember exactly where that tidal swamp was. So I'm going to keep going, and hopefully I will find it, and hopefully there's still some seashore paspalum there. Here we go. Here's a bit of a tidal swamp going into some mangroves, and I'm going to look for grass around here and see what's growing at the edge of the water. In fact, this may be the same place where I found the seashore paspalum years ago. Nope, this is not seashore paspalum, although this is the type of environment in which seashore paspalum grows, right next to water. But this even looks a bit like torpedo grass, Panicum repens, but I believe this is seashore dropseed, Sporobolus virginicus. Here's more of that seashore dropseed, saltwater cooch, Sporobolus virginicus, and this sometimes you can find it even a little bit more fine bladed than what we see here. And I don't see any seed heads. It's got a panicle. It's a compressed panicle at first as it's immature, and I've seen people mistake this grass for zoysia because it's growing in a habitat where you might find zoysia, and the seed head at first looks like a single raceme, but it expands into a panicle as it matures. Here we go. So here's the seed head, and this is our seashore drop seed, and it is definitely not a zoysia. So it tends to grow in areas that are more dry than where you would find a seashore paspalum, and it tends to grow in areas that have a more unstable root zone than zoysia. Zoysia will tend to grow in areas that are persistent, where the sand doesn't move, where the grass will be able to live there for a very long time, because zoysia is more slow growing. You can see this seashore drop seed can grow up and grow more rapidly, and it's more like a cynodon, a Bermuda grass in that way, in that it can expand and colonize areas more quickly, more rapidly than a zoysia would. So you don't find zoysia competing very well in these types of moving sands. I have completely failed so far to find anything resembling a turf grass. No paspalum, no Bermuda, no zoysia. Lots of saltwater cooch, also called seashore drop seed, the Sporobolus virginicus, which is a common plant here. There's some just to my side right now, and we're passing through an area with lots of that grass, and I am optimistic that I'll be able to find some grasses that we could use as turf, and I'm going to keep going along the beach and find them. Well, here's one. This is another grass that is different than what we've seen before. This one is Thuaria involuta, which I think might have a common name that is extremely common and appropriate, tropical beach grass. I do need to look that one up because I always know it by the scientific name Thuaria involuta. It also grows right near the beach in sand, and it has the little white flower that makes it quite easy to identify. I identify it usually just by its habitat, but then it has these white flowers that are pretty common, and it is often in flower. So you can see this grass and the white flowers, and you know this is Thuaria involuta. And it's also growing quite near to the sea, and it is mixed in together with a stand of Sporobolus virginicus. So we're not too far from the water. Now this looks really promising. I just spotted a little opening here. It looks kind of familiar, and I said maybe that's a spot where there's a bit of some water. Now here's a patch of Thuaria involuta. You can see all of those white flowers as this grass blooms, but beyond that there is a swamp back there, and I wonder whether we could find some seashore paspalum in that. Lots of Thuaria involuta. Yeah, I don't see any seashore paspalum. Here is the seashore drop seed again, and it's got a seed head that initially people could mistake for a zoysia because it looks like a raceme, but as it matures it expands into an open panicle, which is nothing like zoysia. And this plant tends to grow it has the appearance of growing more rapidly. So it's just a bigger plant with some coarser leaf blades, although there are types that have a pretty narrow leaf blade. So this will expand into an open panicle, and it will be clear that it's not a zoysia. Well, still completely striking out on finding my paspalum or finding zoysia, but I see some rocks over there. That's where the rocks are. That's where I found the zoysia before, and I am confident that I'll find it again. It was a bit sunnier when I did this 11 years ago. I gotta put the camera away and keep it dry now. Well, I'm gonna try that again. I got soaked this morning, so after a change of clothes and checking the radar numerous times, I'm gonna try just before sunset now, and the tide's a little bit higher, so we may see some grass pretty close to the water. I'm gonna try to walk out the rest of this beach out to the point that's over there behind me, and see if I can find any zoysia, see if I can find any seashore paspalum in some kind of tidal swamp that we might find at the edge of the beach, and see what other kind of grasses that might be considered turf type grasses would be found. Again, the idea here is thinking that grasses that are growing in a certain type of soil or a certain type of growing environment in nature, in the wild condition, the grasses that are growing like that, and looking at the habitat in which grasses are growing, may give some insight into how those grasses would work if they are maintained or planted as a managed turf, and in which resources such as water and fertilizer and mowing are performed, or work is done that uses those resources to manage the grass. So this is something that I find quite insightful and interesting, and I'm glad to have a chance to try to share it with you. And I'm going to be looking for these elusive grasses. Right now I'm just seeing sand and moving sand, so there are no grasses on the beach right now. Here's some grass growing in the rocks. That is going to be a seashore drop seed. I believe possibly seashore paspalum. Let me check. I'm gonna have to check what the ligule looks like. Well, that looked a little bit like paspalum, but when I checked the ligule, it's a small fringe of hairs, and with paspalum we would expect that to be a membrane. So we don't have paspalum yet. We still have plenty of Sporobolus virginicus, which is what that was, and we'll carry on. Still a long ways to go. Well, I have to duck down low. I'm trying to stay as dry as possible, but there is a lot of water right around my feet as it's a very high tide. So anyway, no grass is here, just some trees overhanging a very narrow little beach, a few hammocks. But I am gonna come up to a more open area, and I'm pretty sure I'm gonna find some grasses up there when there's a bit more sunshine and a bit more stable soil. Well, I've made it through the trees. Looks like I've come into a bit of a more open area. I don't have to worry so much about my feet getting wet, and there's some rocks now, and I don't see any grasses growing on them, but I do see some plants. So in these type of rocks where there are some type of foothold or root hold where plants can grow and hang on against the waves, we can find some plants growing. There's no zoysia here, but I'm going to continue on, and I think as we get farther out along that point, we might find some zoysia. And I'm sorry, I still haven't been able to find any seashore paspalum, which is not a terrible surprise to me, although some people might expect to find it in this environment, but it's, I don't know, I haven't found it really thriving anywhere where things dry out. It seems to require constant replenishment with water. Well, there's some grasses here. This is our seashore drop seed again, or saltwater cooch. And I'll step over that little tidal pool. There's more grass out here. This also is our Spirobolus virginicus, the saltwater cooch. So on the rocks over there, I've seen zoysia before. I'm going to see if I can get over there before sunset and check that out. Oh, looks like there's some zoysia right here. In fact, 11 years ago, I remember seeing the first zoysia right here, and it's still there. And that's not terribly surprising because zoysia is a stress-tolerating plant and it grows slowly. And these plants have survived for a long time. And this is our typical zoysia seed head, a single raceme, that I still can't quite figure out how to get this camera to focus really well to show something up close that I want it to focus on. But there is the single raceme of a fine-bladed zoysia, and this is all our zoysia right here in these rocks by the ocean. So it's just anchored in these cracks, getting splashed, and looks like it could be a pretty nice little turf grass. I see a little path, and I think that this path going up off the beach is actually leading to an old telegraph station where the wire went into the sea and down over to Taiwan. So I'm going to go up this path and see if that's where I think I am. Yep, there it is. So we can see a couple other grasses here while we're at it. So there is the marker. There's the old telegraph station, and that is no longer functioning, but that is a historical marker here. There's some Ishigaki beef in the pasture up there. And if we just look down, we can see a few grasses that are not common right at the seashore, but as we get away from the seashore, we now see cynodon, Bermuda grass. We see Aloisine indica, which is goose grass, or in Australia, it's called crow's foot grass. And the taller bunch grass here is a different kind of Spirobolus, not the seashore drop seed, but this is most likely Spirobolus indicus, which is smut grass. And so we can see this one. This is a seed head of Spirobolus indicus. All right, I'm gonna leave that telegraph station and head back down. I'm gonna head back down to the beach and go find some more zoysia. Maybe find some with waves splashing right over it. So as we get away from the beach, they're just a slightly different botanical composition. But away from the beach there, that was on a road or on like a gravel parking area. So you can think the soil's a little bit more compacted. Maybe the root systems would be a little bit more restricted. It might be a little bit drier there. And in that kind of condition, it's really typical to find cynodon, which is more drought tolerant. And it's common to find the goosegrass, of course, in compacted soils. Still no paspalum though. Well, I've come from way over there, walked along the beach that we can see here, and the tide's up, and I'm now out at that point, or at the start of the point. There's lots of rocks, and I'm gonna look for what I find for grass. And I do see up ahead by that little pink float, it does appear that on those rocks there are some plants, which I can't see yet if those plants are gonna be grasses or not. But somewhere around here I do expect to find some grasses. A lot of coral here, so this is not really stable, so we don't really see plants growing in this. We do see those non-grasses growing on this rock, and I don't know what plant species that is, but I don't see any grass. But I'm going to carry on to that next part of the point up there, and I suppose at some point I'll stumble across some grasses. This is just remarkable. I'm seeing a clump of what looks like zoysia, and I haven't been out to this point for 11 years, and yet that zoysia is still there. So that grass is pretty persistent. So this one here, this is zoysia. That grass is zoysia. That's a fine-bladed zoysia. This one is not zoysia. This one is our seashore drop seed that we identified before. The grass with the light fringe of hairs at the ligule. And then on this rock, this one is a zoysia right here. And these ones are all zoysia there. So it's quite interesting to see as we reach the corner of the island, and I'm running out of daylight, so I'm not going to go look at the plants growing over there. I found what I was looking for, and that is to confirm that this zoysia is still here. There's still zoysia on those rocks right behind me, and that zoysia was there 11 years ago, and I see it again. And it's interesting to me that there's also this little bit of zoysia that's growing even where this, this is moved by the waves. This is broken coral, and yet there still can be a little bit of zoysia there that can persist in that type of area. So it's pretty cool to see this, and then to reflect on grasses that grow in this kind of environment, what that means for species selection when using as a managed turf, and what it means for management if you are going to be planting and choosing that kind of grass. And I will reflect on that, but first let me get going on the walk and get away from the beach and get on a road before it gets too dark out here. There's the roof of that telegraph station from the beach. All right, bye-bye beach. I don't know when I'll be back, but I imagine that zoysia will still be there. All right, so we didn't see any cynodon along the beach. We didn't see any Sporobolus indicus, smut grass along the beach. But as we come up here to this little parking area and road area by the old telegraph station, now we can see the cynodon, and we see in the compacted area on the road lots of goosegrass and some of that Sporobolus indicus. Well, I'm walking up to the main road from the telegraph station, and through the shaded area back there I also saw a little bit of tropical carpet grass, which is Axonopus compressus. That grass is not so common here. It's not used on lawns so much. Like if you get a little bit farther south to Hong Kong or Hanoi or anywhere in the Philippines or Thailand or down around the equator at Singapore, you see a lot of tropical carpet grass. But here, the lawns here, there's a lot of Stenotaphyrum secundatum, or the common name would be St. Augustine grass, or in Australia, that would be buffalo grass. And it's interesting to me that at this latitude, about 24 degrees north of the equator, that there is not so much of the tropical carpet grass, and there's way more Stenotaphyrum secundatum than I find in a place like Bangkok. There's some delicious Wagyu here, and these beef at Ishigaki Island are renowned for having delicious meat, very tender, and how could it not be when you're grazing in pastures with this type of view every day? Pretty lovely scenery here. So I was just down there along the beach and checking the grasses out at that point, and where the waves are splashing up against the rocks there was a little bit of zoysia and a little bit of seashore dropseed. So what kind of things can I learn or infer from paying attention or observing what the growing environment is in which these different grasses are growing? And we saw a little bit of Bermuda grass. We saw 0 seashore paspalum on the walk today, and we saw an appreciable amount of a very fine-bladed zoysia. Now, I haven't talked about what species of zoysia is, because what species of zoysia it is, because honestly I don't know. And I would just say that it is a Matrella or a Pacifica, and it's questionable. You know, there are interspecific hybrids of zoysia, so it could also be a hybrid between a Matrella and a Pacifica. And I don't know, the ocean out there, that is kind of at the boundary of the East China Sea and the Philippine Sea, which are seas in the Pacific Ocean. So probably it's reasonable to say that this is a Zoysia pacifica, and that is one thing that the people might have questions about. Another thing, you see, I got rained out on the morning session, and it looks like I may get caught in some rain now also, and it's cloudy. And this is a location with a lot of rain and a lot of clouds, especially in the winter. The island group here, this location is quite cloudy, and that has some implication for how the zoysia might perform as a managed turf. One place where we saw a grass growing and it wasn't zoysia was along all of the sandy areas, where we could see where once the sand got stable enough to where it wasn't moving constantly and it could support some plant growth, the grass species that we saw growing there were 2 of them. One was the seashore dropseed, Sprobolus virginicus, and the other species was Thuaria involuta, or tropical beach grass, I believe it's called. There wasn't any zoysia there, and that may be because the zoysia doesn't grow fast enough to colonize those areas. But you think, why weren't there any plants of zoysia there? There's zoysia seed around. There's zoysia seed that could wash up, or zoysia seed that could be deposited by birds, or insects or zoysia seed that could be blown by the wind. But we didn't see any zoysia there. And I would suggest that the reason is because this type of zoysia is not tolerant of really dry soil conditions. And that's what you get with sand. Now, should we think about golf courses for a minute and think about sand-capped golf courses and the type of conditions in which zoysia might be planted on a sand-capped golf course? I'm just going to change the battery real quick and then give some more thoughts about this. I got the battery changed, so that should be plenty of battery charge now for everything else that I would like to say on this walk. And I was mentioning that one place where we can find grasses growing, specifically we could find the Thuaria involuta and the Spirobolus virginicus. We find them growing on the beach in the sand once the sand is stable enough and it's not constantly moving, it's not constantly washed by the tides or blown by the wind. And we don't find zoysia in those areas despite the zoysia being able to grow there. And I suggest that the probable reason for that, we know it's not because it's too saline, because we can find the zoysia growing even closer to the ocean than that. But what the zoysia needs to be in a stable location, and somehow I think that sand just doesn't hold enough water. So I hear sometimes that zoysia is supposed to have this incredible drought tolerance or be more drought tolerant than other grasses, and there needs to be some context around that. Zoysia is more drought tolerant than seashore paspalum, and it's more drought tolerant than cool season grasses. If you have a choice between cool season grass and zoysia, then zoysia is going to use a lot less water than the cool season grasses. But if you look at zoysia versus Bermuda grass, which is another choice that you have when you're choosing warm season grasses, Bermuda grass will perform better. And right now I'm in a very rainy and cloudy place. So in a rainy and cloudy place, we can see a lot of zoysia growing wild. And the Bermuda does grow wild here, but the Bermuda grows wild in areas that are a little bit back from the beach. So I think it's important to consider that zoysia is going to require some substantial amount of water in order to persist. And where we do find it growing right next to the ocean, it's getting splashed with a lot of water. So as long as you have a lot of water available to supply, then zoysia can work okay. Now, I've got a couple thoughts about paspalum. I didn't see any today. I did see a little bit over at Takitomi Island last week. Just a little bit, and I may throw up a picture of that or make another video of that. And I recall in 2011 when I took this walk, I did find one little tidal swamp where I found a little bit of zoysia, a little bit of seashore paspalum growing. But this time I didn't, today I did not. And so in this part of the world, or at least on this section of beach, on this particular island, it's not so common to find seashore paspalum. And seashore paspalum is more like a transient plant or a temporary plant, because I had not seen it before at that particular location where I found it at Takitomi Island. So I found it at Takitomi Island and I saw it there for the first time, and then I've seen it here before, but I didn't see it this time. So that tells me that that grass in this climate kind of comes and goes. And that's not a surprise, because I consider seashore paspalum to be a relatively high maintenance grass for most places as a maintained turf grass. because it requires an artificially high growth rate to persist, because on its own it just doesn't. So it needs, as maintenance, it needs to be stimulated to grow a little bit faster than it otherwise would, or it just kind of disappears. So that's a bit of rambling from me. The 2023 edition of my botanical walk on Ishigaki Island. I did this in 2012, 11 years ago, and I had some thoughts then that are similar to what I've mentioned today, and I saw some of the same plants, certainly the same species growing in some of the same locations. And I think, you know, zoysia is a great grass in the right place, but it also can grow really slow. You saw how small those plants are, and you saw the environment in which they're growing. They're growing just in these cracks in the rock. And when you've got grass that's just growing in a crack in the rock, and it's not spreading very much, it's just kind of persisting, it's tolerating stress. And that kind of stress tolerance that zoysia has means, as a managed turf, it's going to grow pretty slow, and that can be a benefit. But if it gets damaged, if it gets a disease scar, so if you grow it in a place, for example, where it goes dormant in the winter, well, if you do that, then you have to prevent any diseases, because if you don't prevent the diseases, it can get a disease scar, and some pretty hideous disease scars, depending on the severity of diseases like large patch or spring dead spot. But if it does get those diseases, or if you scalp it or something, because of the slow growing characteristics of the grass, it can take a long time to recover and to look the way you want it to look again. It's also pretty slow to recover from drought stress. So if you let it get too droughty, if you let it get too dormant from drought, it can take a long time to recover. Thanks for joining me on this walk, and I hope my microphone, the windshield on this microphone, is working better than what I had on the last botanical walk, because it's been breezy at times, and I would like to be able to listen to what I've been talking about here without too much wind noise distraction. Okay, there's plenty more information about grass selection type of issues and some of the interactions between light and temperature, and information about precipitation and other things about the climate relation with different type of grass performance and different type of grass selection issues at asianturfgrass.com. So if you're interested in that, you can check out my website, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.